Hi, everybody. Welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors Thrive in China Roundtable. The Thrive in China Roundtable is a concept that we started in January of this year, where we are building up a community of people, companies who are interested in understanding how to do business in China. And the topics that we generate throughout the year is everything from how to systemize and scale up your business in China, whether it has to do with e-commerce, B2B trade, or service-oriented industries. And today I'm very pleased to have Ryan Malloy come in, and he's going to be talking about the e-commerce platforms. And I guess from 1 year ago, hopefully there'll be new information also about what these e-commerce platforms can do for you and do for your business. But before we start, I just want to quickly go through some admin slides. How the roundtable works is that we are here to educate you. And sometimes we might ask you questions about your experiences. If you can, I have muted everybody. Please just put your comments, questions into the chat box. When it comes to China, there is no dumb question. So feel free to ask whatever you like. Don't be shy. This is your time spent, and the whole point of this roundtable is really to have discussion for about 20, 30 minutes, depending on how long Ryan talks for today, to really debate the topic around e-commerce. From a technical standpoint, we are using Zoom meeting. Ryan is a co-host, so if I drop out, he will continue. If he drops out, I can't do his presentation, but we will wait for him to pop back in. And hopefully that won't take too long. It usually takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes to always reboot. If you run into any technical issues, my only suggestion is log off, log back into the system. We are recording today's session, so you can always look at the recording at a later date. Now, just to introduce myself, as I am the moderator for this week, and I will be moderating the Q&A and the debate later on after Ryan's presentation. My name is Kristina Koehler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I'm a leading expert on inbound investment to China. What does this mean? It means that I help foreign investors with their market entry, with their implementation, and with their growth and scaling in the Chinese market, focused around finance issues, corporate compliance issues, and administrative issues. And one of the beautiful things that has happened in the last 18 years of doing this work in China is a lot of things have become systemized and have become actual processes when it comes to corporate compliance administration, helping foreign companies to actually be able to scale up and grow at a much quicker pace. If you are interested to learn more about us, go to woodburnglobal.com, and you can find a lot of content on there that can help you. But let's get cracking ahead. We've got Ryan, who's going to be talking about establishing your brand on China's e-commerce platforms. Ryan?
Brilliant. Thanks, Kristina. And thanks to yourself and the Woodburn team for having me. I'll just share up my screen here, if you can see that okay?
Yes, it's perfect.
Brilliant. All right, I'll get started. So today I'll be talking about how to establish your brand on China's e-commerce platforms. We've just finished up 618, so the mid-year promotional period, and there's been lots of discussions that often lead to brands, looking at what other platforms they might want to expand on in the market, or for their first time starting to look at China as a potential market once they've seen how well their categories are doing. So it's really a perfect time, I think, to run through and explain what some of these platforms are about, and which ones we would recommend and what things to look out for. So most of the things that I'll touch on today would range from, where to start, which categories are doing well, which what to look out for when you're trying to look for a Tmall partner to work with, and then other tips on media spend and what to expect. So if we look at online shopping behavior in China, definitely there's been a greater tendency for consumers in China to buy the majority of products online across a number of categories. So if we look here, you can see that, especially across the likes of fashion, electronics, grocery, cosmetics, we're seeing much more sales in the kind of I'm now shopping more online or I exclusively shop online. And this is something that we've seen continue to grow. It is definitely important for brands to consider offline sales. It's something that we would always recommend. But what we do see for a lot of brands is that within the first year, a large proportion of the sales will come through their e-commerce stores. And a big part of trying to grow a brand in China is really that kind of customer acquisition phase. So looking at how you can get, products into your first 10,000 customers' hands. It's a big part of how you kind of get that cycle running. And e-commerce is generally an easier and less expensive way of getting that done. So this says a lot about kind of the growth and where it's going. And then once you see China as an opportunity in the e-commerce space, it really then becomes a discussion of, do I go through cross-border or do I have domestic e-commerce? And the answer to that question is really up to a number of things. It might be the category. Some categories, it's quite difficult, the process that you have to go through in order to sell. So if we look at personal care, some nutritional health products, the easy option often looks as a starting point as cross-border, then getting all of the product registrations done, and then you can move on to domestic. If you're in food and beverage, you might look directly at going into domestic and working the distributor or setting up your entity. Or, with some, you can have both, right? So we do work with a number of brands that will set up and sell domestically through Tmall and JD. But then they'll also have a cross-border store where they can do a lot of MPD, right? So they can put new products on the cross-border store within a couple of weeks, and they can test out what's working for market. So the main thing is really trying to understand the category, the focus, and which platform makes sense. From a Chinese consumer's perspective, it's all through the same search. So it's not really going to have too much of an influence on the consumer, but it will have an influence in terms of the logistics, the payment function, and the level of what you can do. There are some limitations with cross-border. So, and then differences would be cross-border has lower initial investment. There are some VAT benefits, and it's good for a kind of test the market. But from, if you're able to get some different deals with retailers, it does limit initially where you can sell. You can only sell through the free trade zones. And if you are to move ahead with cross-border, then you've got to think about, would you have the direct shipping model or the bonded warehousing model? Bonded warehouse, essentially you sell through a free trade zone here in China. And then with direct shipping model, you would sell through the global fulfillment from the country of origin. So you send individual orders every time there's a sale from that country. Often we would say bonded warehouse. It's better really going for free trade zone because if you're serious about the market, you want to ensure customers are getting 24 to 48 hour delivery. Whereas if you go with the direct shipping model, then it can be up to 2 weeks. Actually, in fact, for some of our brands now with COVID regulations, it's 3 to 4 weeks sometimes. So often it's better to have the product in the free trade zone. And then if we look at the EC platforms, there's a lot out there. It's actually becoming much simpler. So I think when we had this webinar last year, there was a lot more in terms of different platforms you need to look out for and their benefits. What we've actually seen is that a lot of it is consolidated. Now, if we look at the platforms, I believe in domestic, JD and Tmall hold over 80%. I think I have a slide on it later. So really, they're the two big players, right? If you're looking to sell into the market, you've got Tmall and JD. There is one that has started to take more share, actually, that isn't really on here because it's more of a social commerce tool, and that is Douyin. So for a lot of our clients, that we're seeing 50–60% of the e-commerce sales in China are actually going through Douyin. It's definitely the biggest growth. It had 15-fold increase in sales with 618, whereas JD, for example, had a 10% increase in sales in growth. So a lot of opportunity there. Again, there are some pitfalls with Douyin. One would be that the cross-border model is still in its infancy. You can apply for the store, but not so much. And also, it's very much a live streaming, sales-orientated tool. So margins are squeezed, but the volumes are big. So it really depends on trying to have product discovery and what is the purpose of what you're trying to do. But outside of that, on flagships, JD, Tmall, they're really the top two. And our recommendation would be to start with Tmall, just because they have a better promotional tools set up and kind of display. And it still is kind of the number one place for the majority of consumers to go when they have that initial search. And this really just kind of displays that, right? So if we look at the domestic EC market, Tmall and JD have up to around 90%, over 90% of that market, right? So that really kind of shows you that if you can play on both of them platforms, then you're covering most of that. Whereas, last year and a couple of years ago, I think it was more towards 50, 60, 70%. And then if we look at B2C, cross-border, a little bit less, 75%. There are a lot of platforms that kind of, do cater towards cross-border, but we are seeing year on year that kind of, it does shrink, and very much Tmall and JD are growing and taking more of that pie. So again, they're the two major platforms to look out for. And then so the social commerce platforms. So this was what I just mentioned with Douyin. We classify them differently. The way that the data is saved actually classifies them differently. I find that a shame, because it's quite hard to compare apples and oranges when actually they're both selling products. So I think Douyin should be placed onto the other graph. This is the way it's usually displayed. If we give a bit of recap on some of these platforms, Douyin really has, in terms of sales, been a #1 platform for anyone that's doing anything in terms of entertainment, fitness, apparel, alcohol. It's really a growth platform to be looking out for. Kuaishou, similar, also a video focused platform. Both of them have been doing very well. Kuaishou's live streaming during 618 surpassed some of the larger platforms. And then if we look at Little Red Book and the mini program, they haven't been as successful. There's been quite a lot of hype around the mini program over the last 3 to 4 years. If I look at our clients, it's useful if, for example, you're established here in market, you have your own, offline flagship stores, such as if you're a fashion brand or you're a retailer. It can be very, very useful for people to come in, buy, purchase, then leave, and then they can later buy at home on the mini program. But it has to have a function. If we're looking purely for, say, cross-border e-commerce, it's very hard to be discovered. And Little Red Book has completely changed in function now. It's very much marketing driven, non-sales. So we've seen revenues on these two platforms not really grow at all, if I'm honest, in the last couple of years. So there's something that, if it makes sense for what you're trying to do, then they have some benefits, but it's not something we'd really stage in the beginning. You're better starting with the larger ones. FMCG, stages of entry. So this is a little bit about kind of different things that you need to look at before kind of entering the market and considering e-commerce. #1 is always IP protection. If you don't necessarily need to have a Chinese trademark to sell cross-border, for example, but it would be heavily advised not to do that, highly advised, just because you will lose the trademark if you don't have it registered, because there are a lot of spotters that look for new products that go in cross-border. They will then register, and then you're blocked from really ever coming in domestically. So IP protection is the #1 thing you have to think about. And that also looks at, stage 3, localization. You need to be making sure that Chinese names are registered. You need to make sure that your slogans are registered, all of that IP. We are seeing it harder and harder for brands to get the right name, to get the slogan they want, just because a lot of them are taken. So that's the first point. The second point would be understanding the strategy. For some brands, it doesn't necessarily make sense to go through the cross-border phase. So this isn't for all brands. This is for FMCG in particular, right? For other brands, it might make sense to jump straight to setting up an entity or to finding a distributor. But for the point of FMCG, generally what we suggest is getting the localization in place so that you understand what you're going to say to Chinese consumers. You understand what you have in terms of brand name. You understand how your landing pages should look, key visuals. You might need some production to be done so that you have them localized shots as well. It doesn't need to be a huge exercise, but it's just trying to get things in place, right? And especially with the Chinese name, the earlier you can start to push that in your marketing strategy, the better. If we look at by search volume, over 85, I think it's about 85, 86% of all consumer search for foreign brands is still the Chinese name, right? So it's beneficial for brands to ensure that they get that sorted and are promoting that name as early as possible. The next part would be setting up the cross-border platforms, building the sales, starting to grow that kind of that name in the market, that initial 10,000 customers. The next point would be then opening up the media channels. So with media channels, we always just say you need to have something there, right, for validation purposes. The spend in terms of KOLs and everything else can come later, but have that all set up, expand across the cross-border e-commerce channels. So as you saw on the previous slide, starting with Tmall, then moving out to JD, Kaola, all of the other ones, so that you're growing that presence. And then you would really look at merchant sales, for example, so working with Taobao sellers, and there's a whole other kind of retail chain through the cross-border element. And then it's a point of you have much more leverage at this stage to have discussions with distributors, to then come in and you know, you've got to a point now where, you know, you have some growth going through, you might want to set up your own woofie in China. So that's kind of, it gives you that test and learn period, and then you can have the launch of the offline and the domestic e-commerce. So this isn't, you know, the kind of the perfect fits for all brands, but for FMCG, it's something that we've found to work. And then this is just really looking at, I guess, another way of how that works. So kind of breaking down what you need in terms of name, localization, key visuals, getting that all ready, moving on to the cross-border flagship store, opening their own media, and then the test and learn. So I just mentioned this before. It's really important when you have that, the first 3 to 6 months of your Tmall store, I would say even up to 3 months, if you can try and pull in as much learnings as possible, to understand what SKUs sell well, to understand what helps you sell your products better, to understand what media works. And I'll show an example of a case and give some background into how we were able to help this brand go from, you know, about 20,000 RMB sales to 1 million within 2 months. And then in terms of TPs, so this is one element that a lot of brands, I think, struggle with the most. You do need a partner of some sort to operate your store. In some cases, when you're here domestically, it could be a distributor. If you want to build your own team and you have an entity, it could be yourself. You could hire people, but that comes with its own problems, being that if someone is to leave, you suddenly lose operation of your store. So TPs are usually the way to go. Working with a TP, basically they will look after the operations of your store, all of the customer service, all of the marketing elements, they'll organize the logistics. So it's a very key role in the success of the brand, right? And so this selection is really important part of the journey, and you need to make sure you put enough time and effort behind it. And some of the key things is trying to understand the expertise they already have, area of specialization, service scope. Can they support in terms of the marketing side? You have to understand there's so many different areas where you can spend and allocate budget to support the growth of the Tmall store. So if the agency can only help you with Tmall operation, it's now not really enough, right? You need to have understanding of different platforms, and really, I think, trying to understand their aspirations as well, right? So what brands are they trying to work for? There is a commission model. There's usually a service fee, but also a commission model that's put in place. With regards to TPs, you know, what motivates them? Do they have knowledge in that category, or do they have aspirations to grow that brand? So I think they're the most important elements. And obviously pricing model. The pricing model can vary significantly from, I think I've seen it as low as about 20,000 RMB a month, all the way through to about 150,000 RMB a month. So finding the, you know, what makes sense in terms of the price is right, but then also they're able to offer that support. And, you know, that one thing that a lot of brands are also kind of shocked about is they often have to pitch the TP in some cases. The majority of TPs, especially based in China, will work with very large brands where they make the majority of their money through commission, right? And we all know it does take time to grow a brand in market. So for them, it's often a case of is it worth the effort and time? So pitching a TP doesn't mean that, the brand doesn't have success, and don't let that, be something that will push you away from entering the Chinese market. It's just part of the practice that often happens. So, and the thing that they care about the most is how invested is the brand in market, how much success has it had at home and globally, guidance on the overall plan for China, and investment and budgeting and marketing promotion that the brand is willing to put forward. So they're the key things really to prepare for that discussion. And as I mentioned before, these are all of the different parts the TP will look after, all the way from SEO, in-app promotion, strategy, planning, visuals, landing page design, storage and delivery, commodity and competitor recaps as well, so that test and learn period. So really the whole part. So that it's really important to get that part right. And so once you've found a partner that you want to work with, the next part is, okay, localization. And localization is an important part that shouldn't consume too much of your energy. And the reason I say that is it changes as you move along. I think the most important thing to get right in the beginning is the name. You don't want to be changing your name more than once. So once you've got the name correct, then it's really about learning more about the brand and changing that kind of that visual identity that you have as you move along. So, in the initial point, as I mentioned, understanding that localization is more than just translation. So trying to understand your tone of voice, trying to understand how you want to sound or come across to Chinese consumers, and then understanding your USPs as well. So don't fix what isn't broken. A lot of USPs that you will have in your country of origin are also appealing USPs to Chinese consumers. But often what we find is there'll be one or two that becomes more preferable in this market. So we'll put more emphasis on these sales points. So it's not about removing anything, changing anything, or adding anything in. It's about how much do we emphasize particular sales points, and how do we bring that through in the marketing. And some of the kind of challenges and questions that you have is, one, how can I grow my brand recognition in the market? Making sure that the brand name sounds correct or not strange to Chinese consumers. This is an interesting one because you've got two options, really. You can essentially create a name that sounds very similar to the name you would have in your home country, or you can create a name that has similar meaning to your brand name. The perfect one is, we call it dual adaptation, which basically means that you can create a name that sounds like the brand name you already have in Chinese, and it has the same meaning. That's not always possible, especially when it comes down to finding what's actually you can register. It becomes quite difficult. So what we recommend is always go with meaning if you can, right? The meaning is the most important part. And then also, I think some of the key questions would be, how does the product fit into Chinese lifestyle as well? So trying to take the product and create recipes, if it's in food and beverage, that fit from a local perspective, trying to find ways that the product or brand can be utilized out and about, or can fit into them perfect moments of life. So that's the really important part. And I think that the next part would be also, it's quite hard, a lot of brands we work with in the beginning, to kind of let go a little bit. You don't want to, no one's going to destroy the brand, and it does make sense to keep that connection between what you would have in your home country in China, but you also need to have the ability to be flexible, and to realize that some parts of the identity would need to change the brand personality to fit the market here. And so this is some examples of store creatives. So this was for one of our clients. I'll show the case study later for John West Tuna. And so the creatives, this is some examples of things that we pulled out, right? They're important. So looking at certain USPs that were very important, that weren't when it came to in the West, and also even preparation, right? So I remember we had a client that was in cheesecakes, frozen cheesecakes. The biggest issue we had in our marketing campaigns and online was that a lot of consumers were eating the cheesecakes frozen. So we had to put in a huge education piece all across e-commerce, to tell consumers, hang on, you've got to wait 20 minutes and let it defrost. So it sometimes feels like the simple things, but they're really important. They make all the difference. And we found that our negative comments on e-commerce dropped significantly, and that people were much more happy with the product. So product origin, materials, ingredients, functions, unique selling points, photos are a must. So if you were to go further down this landing page, there's pictures of consumers trying the product, eating the product on picnics, out and about. So, these are all things that come out of that localization piece. And then, so if you're opening a store in e-commerce, it's more or less the same across most platforms in terms of what you have to do. Even if we look at social commerce like Douyin, they're all within a similar period of time that it takes. Actually, if you look at social commerce such as Douyin, it's stricter as the regulations. The reason why is because it's tied to marketing these platforms. So Little Red Book, Douyin can actually be harder to set up these stores and the media accounts that links them than it can be with Tmall. So in the beginning, it's trying to understand product strategy, store visuals that you would have, and as I showed you before, kind of the layout of the store homepage, and then also in terms of understanding quantity delivery, synchronization, how the logistics is going to work, ERP synchronization, all of these parts, right? Submitting the application through to the store. So that's the next point. Usually now with Tmall, there was a time 5 or 6 years ago, it was very difficult, and you had to go through a long process to open up a Tmall store. It's now relatively straightforward. We haven't had any rejections for a Tmall application now in about 3 years. So it's something you had to worry about, but you wouldn't no longer. The application is relatively straightforward. If you work with a TP, then it's it can take a couple of working days to get that sorted. Then you have to wait for the verification. So during that phase, there's a lot of back and forth around the product types, ingredients, all of kind of the regulatory things that you would need to have, qualifications, certifications. Then the store opening preparations can start. And that really is linking everything that you've designed. So usually what we say before is you need to get everything, all your ducks in a row before you get the application has come through and you get the verified account, and then you can launch to market. If not, you end up spending 3-4 months just trying to get the store ready. And then launch is ahead. So planning for that first test and learn period for the first 2 to 3 months, and then making sure you have enough of a data feed to help you grow the business. And the main thing with online is sales, right? So with e-commerce, at the end of the day, this is what it really comes down to. There's a lot in terms of, yes, you need to get the branding right. Yes, where are we putting marketing budget? But the main thing that the TP should be kind of measured against is GMV. It's how much sales can come into the account. And really that's based on 3 things, right? The amount of traffic, the cost of traffic, the average transaction value, and the conversion rate. These are all things that the TP is responsible for increasing. Conversion rate is increased by discounting. It's increased by basically having better landing pages, better videos, better things where consumers land on the page, they go, wow, this is actually great, I will buy it. Transaction value is bundling. So being able to find what combinations of products sell well together, being able to understand what is that perfect price point, how many products would be best. Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 5? That really brings up that transaction value. Unfortunately, with most, and this is a big question I often get around e-commerce in China, there's not really any subscription model platforms, right, that you can get in other countries. So a mini program you could build and you could fit in a subscription model for sure, because you have that flexibility. But all of the major platforms, there isn't really a subscription model. You can only buy one at a time, or in bulk, and then you have to go back and do it again. And then traffic is something you can't really change too much. It's paid for to some extent, so you can invest more money, but the amount of traffic a TP can bring is the same, right? Everyone invests a certain amount for a certain amount of traffic. So the next two, the average transaction value and the conversion rate, is really how you grow a successful store online. And if we look at how do we grow that traffic, a lot of brands will say, well, in the first year, it's not that profitable, or I'm not making too much money in terms of, sales. the fact of the matter is that it takes a long time to grow up that organic and repeat purchase, right? That traffic. That's where you really are able to build and make money as a brand, is when you already have a customer base. So the first year is about growing that customer base. And how do we do that? We invest in paid traffic tools, content traffic tools, and here's a list of them. I think this slide is just good for showing the complexity of the different traffic tools and why that test and learn part is so important. We've been working with brands that we've taken over from TPs where they've been investing in 2 tools that clearly just weren't working, and they had for them for other brands, but then we started to do a test and learn program and understand what did work, and we had great results. So it's really important to understand where that investment is going and build up that organic traffic and repeat purchase. And for brands where, if after 1 to 2 years it's still not becoming a profitable venture, you have to start really looking at that organic traffic and repeat purchase and think and ask yourself, well, it's not, customers aren't coming back, right? And it can't be a case of there's something wrong with the platform, the TP. You've got to start thinking about new product development. You've got to start thinking about different ways that you can build in marketing that would explain why this is a repeat purchase, or anything that can tie in that second purchase. And this is just a brief look at some of the tools, right? So SEO, Diamond Booth, it just shows kind of how they would be displayed when it comes to the platform itself. So in the beginning, a lot of it is, pinch our bow, super recommendation. So your kind of display ads, building out lots of content. So when consumers search to look at content around certain categories, they can find your brand. And then also you can work on Taobao. Taobao is basically like a sub-distributor section of Tmall, where you can work with a discounted rate with sub-merchants, and they essentially can sell on your product. That can actually be sometimes the most successful way of growing a brand on Tmall, if you have the margin to give 10-20% to a particular merchant. And then so if we look at the sales conversion part, how do we change this, right? How do we increase sales conversion? There's a number of different ways. If we look at how did the traffic get to the store, it's often a case of, if traditional ads within Tmall are more related to discounts, right? It's kind of the banners you always see when you're shopping online, where you click on it, and unless you already know you want to buy it, you're not 100% sure. You'll have a look, and then you'll probably go and buy a brand that you know, right? And so, but if we look at KOL endorsements and product seeding, so working with KOCs, we find that the conversion rate's much higher, right? So the reason why is the majority of people that actually go through to the point of clicking out of Little Red Book, going into Tmall, clicking through onto the store, they're pretty keen to buy the product, right? So that will bring up conversion rate. Having a multi-SKU strategy as well. So being able to, one of the questions I often get is, well, we have 50 different SKUs. How many should I put on the store initially? And we say as many as possible, because in the beginning there is that test and learn period. And so if you're looking at shipping a lot to China, what we usually would say is pick 3 or 4. We would work with the team to pick 3 or 4 that make sense. And then after that's kind of been agreed, you'd have smaller pallets of other products that might do well. And in the next order, we'd then say, okay, we should start focusing on these products. But having multi-SKU product strategy helps in a number of ways. It gives more offers and opportunities. If you only have 3 flavors, there might be someone that doesn't like strawberry, banana, chocolate. They actually like mango, but you didn't have it on the page because you hadn't brought it to market. So it allows them to have that choice there. So that's important. Another reason that's important, having multi-SKU strategy in more products, is it increases the weighting of your store, right? So the more listings you have, the more likely you are to turn up in consumer search. Building a CRM, so building a system where basically you can have membership systems, repeat purchase. This also helps with conversion. You can build in, for example, coupons if they were to purchase as well. Discounts, GWP, so gift with purchase enrichment is very popular at the moment. Gift with purchase is really good because what it does is it means you don't have to lower and discount your product too much. So with brands that we work with, we'll say, they'll say we don't really discount too much. I said, well, China generally is a discount market sometimes, so you kind of need to have that there for the larger festivals. What we can do is we can develop gifts or different products that can be sold with the brand to basically add in that value rather than discounting. So, and landing page optimization, making sure the store is there, making sure there's lots of great assets. These are all things that are really important for growing that sales conversion. And then if we look at pricing strategy, it's important you come up with full prices, A, B, S, and S plus. And this pricing strategy you would then use across all of the different platforms. So basically, S plus is the deepest level of discount that you would have. A would be your selling price. When we look at pricing strategy for China, it's always good to come in a little bit high, make sure you cover logistics and other costs, plus probably about another 20%, 30%. The reason why is it's quite common to have line through price, so you're always kind of on a discount. The reality is everyone knows that it's selling at everyday retail price, but we would call that B price, right? So it's important that you come in with that extra buffer, just so then you can give margin to sub-distributors, as well as I mentioned before. You can also then discount when needed and offer more discounts more frequently. And e-commerce planning is very important, right? So it's quite different to offline in that with e-commerce planning, a lot, up to 50% of annual sales happen probably in about 3 or 4 festivals throughout the year when the traffic is at the highest. So it's important that you understand which ones will be relevant. Some, such as 618 Shopping Festival on June 18th, or 9/9 Shopping Festival, 9th of September. The names in China I always find make it quite easy to remember which month it is. And then you've got Double 11, Double 12, November and December as well. So they're the big ones that are important for everyone. And then you often will have smaller shopping festivals throughout the year. There's a mother and baby day, there's a furniture day, there's pretty much, there's a sports and fitness day, there's pretty much a day for every category. And then if we look at e-commerce planning, an important element, as I mentioned before, is to not look at the store by itself and it's an island. You have to understand that media plays an important part as well. And the most important part there is you can spend millions of dollars in media and get lost in the kind of the ocean of China. So you have to understand why you're working with certain platforms, how much you invest into them platforms, but most importantly, when you work with them platforms. The timing is crucial. So this is an example that I think you could, can be used as best practice. But if we were to just assume on the Tmall icon at the top there, which would be 618 or Double 11, which we've just had, this is how you would fit in the different platforms and their usage. So if we look at a platform like Little Red Book, it's very much a foundational platform. If you think about most consumers, when they go to Little Red Book, it's a review platform. People are actually going to see content that's already there. It's unlikely they're on Little Red Book, they come across the content, then they go to buy. It's more they'll see the products, they'll go check on Little Red Book. Oh, there's no reviews, I'm not going to buy this product. It also does have quite high awareness as well. So what you'll find is that it's good about growing the brands. But if we look at returns, it's not very strong. So that's in the initial discovery phase. Then as we move through to working with KOCs on Douyin, creating your own video content, this is really about that kind of early adoption where you create a brand personality, you talk to consumers, you show them your fun side. And again, like Little Red Book, it's really pushing out that awareness phase. Now, when we go to WeChat, the cost per view on WeChat is very, very expensive. And so when you work with KOLs on WeChat, it's much more targeted. So if WeChat, what you're starting to do is you're going into 618, you're probably now, so it's 18th of June, we just had the sales festival. Now you're probably about middle of May. You're going into that sales festival, which starts beginning of June, 1st of June. And you're starting to talk to different niche groups of followers that you believe would have some interest in the brand. And you're already starting to link that upcoming promotion. And in some cases, we have like a pre promotion where we can get them to try. And if they like the product, they'll come back to 618 to buy a big bundle. And then so as you move into 618, the traffic on Tmall is its highest. Now it's time to kick in with live streaming. So live streaming, promotion within Tmall, because the thing is with live streaming that a lot of brands don't realize is that when a lot of people go into live stream, they already know the product they're going to buy, right? So they already have a shopping list of the 5 different things they're going to purchase. And if you're not on that shopping list, you might luckily get bought just because your time, kind of steps over onto the time of the products that they were going there to buy, but unlikely. So we see that the ROI can be relatively low. So you need to build up that shopping list first. So when you work with live streamers on these key festivals, you can get a much better return. And then as we move out, and that it goes back to that brand story. So going back to Weibo, going back to WeChat, going back to Little Red Book, and talking, through PR how great the brand did, and going back to building that story and preparing for the next festival. And yeah, I think I talked through some of these things. There's different ways that now you can focus more on sales. We developed a sales program, a social marketing program with KOCs, where essentially we have ambassadors that will sell the product ongoing. And it's that combination of marketing and sales. We were definitely inspired by live streaming. Live streaming, although very effective, has had a little bit more of a difficult time recently with some of the top players like Via and Li Jiaqi getting in trouble. So it's meant that a fair bit of revenue there has been moved. That being said, it still works if it's used in the right way. But the social marketing program is getting KOCs, everyday people, to sell the product. And it can be much more effective because at the end of the day, China is very much a word of mouth market when it comes to marketing. And then so how do I split that budget? Well, I've talked about kind of Tmall in-app marketing. We've looked at media out-of-app marketing. And then you've got lots of different parts in terms of localization, e-commerce, media retainer. The biggest part of what we're trying to show in this budgeting snapshot is the investment that needs to go within Tmall within the first year. That's a lot because it really is about driving that first purchase. And then if we look at an example of what we were able to do with John West, so with this brand, we were able to go from, I think it was in July, around 40,000 RMB, July, August, and then by Double 11, we reached, I believe it was about 1.4 million, 1.3 million. So how did we grow that? It was really a test and learn element to this, right? So it's trying to look at investment. This just shows what we did on e-commerce, but we actually were able to spread that across marketing as well. So every single platform, we were running different types of ads where we would look at the creative, consumption power, interest, different ways we would position the brand. We would then look at how did people react to this? Were they more likely to buy? Were they upgrading to larger bundles? Were they joining as members? And being able to optimize that was really important. And then also just realizing which SKUs sold. That's a big part of this process as well. And for the media part, which isn't on here, the importance of that is really understanding how do you bring that traffic from other platforms? Is it going to be working with WeChat KOLs? Is it going to be working with Little Red Book KOCs? And then having that test and learn. I think 6 weeks to 2 months or 2.5 months is usually a perfect period of time. And this shows in terms of what we were able to do through the first test and learn period up till here, then going back into to realign, and then the growth. So this was going into September, right? So this was well before we got to the Double 11 period. It was the first 6 weeks back in August, July, August, we started working with them. You can see how slowly there's been this increase. This brand had been at a constant for over 1.5 years before we started to work with them. So very quickly, within 4 weeks, you can see how them sales would increase, a 350% increase in traffic, with only a 35% increase in investment. And then the click-through rate as well for the stores increased. So looking at this conversion, this is a really important part, because I think what brands need to understand is the most important part, and why I mentioned so much budget needs to go into in-app marketing. The most important part is how do you get consumers product into consumers' hands as quickly as possible, because every time you find a consumer that becomes a brand advocate of yourself, they will then recommend this to friends, right? They'll then repeat purchase, and repeat purchase and recommendation really does help, a brand come a long way where you don't have to be constantly putting lots of investment. And so if we look at some of the effective strategies as well, innovation is key to success. It is important to be thinking 3 steps ahead when it comes to new products, new product developments, understanding what flavors might be selling well. It is important to building brand loyalty. If you aren't able to build brand loyalty, you find yourself in a kind of everlasting cat and mouse game of trying to catch up or stay in profitability or get out of too much investment versus return. It's really when you grow that initial loyalty that you'll be able to see solid profit margins. Be prepared to react fast for China and have flexibility. The amount of brands that I've kind of had discussions with, and they've said, we would have been able to do this in China. We just missed this opportunity, right? It might have been a celebrity that had sent them an email saying, I want to work with you, and they missed the email, right? It could be a small thing such as they had their product that was placed on a TV show, one of our other brands we talked to, and they ran out of stock, right? So the product sold immense quantities, and they weren't able to replenish for 6 to 7 months in the market, right? So the flexibility brands need to have is I think the most important thing, and trying to plan for that quick reaction, and trying to create as many touch points as possible. So trying to make sure that there's lots of discussions out there among the brand. Common pitfalls, IP, definitely not registering that, having that in place, not owning all of your media channels as well, letting a distributor run everything for you. I think that's, you lose all of the learnings, and you lose all of the kind of important brand equity that's been built in the market, that if things don't work out with the distributor in 3 years, you then don't have. And so I think that there used to be a time when it was, don't let your distributor run everything for you, because then they might do it wrong, right? I think that now, I think that the tune has changed a little bit in China, where it's, don't let your distributor run everything for you, because you'll learn all the key learnings. You'll lose all of that equity that really the brand needs to grow in market. And it's much more of just a sales game. Not setting realistic expectations would be another one in terms of looking at investment and return. And then, trying to implement the same overseas marketing strategy in China. Brilliant. So I'm hoping I finished within time, but thanks everyone.
It's perfect, Ryan. It's just I've made a whole long list of questions now for you. So everybody, one thing that Ryan hasn't done is actually introduce himself or the company. So Ryan, I do want you a couple of minutes. Pitch yourself, because everything you explained is actually what you do, but maybe you can just give a brief explanation of what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I forgot to do that part. So Redfern Digital, we've been around the market now, I think 15 plus years. We're a full service digital e-commerce agency. So we essentially help brands with everything from running Tmall stores, JD stores, Douyin stores, helping them in terms of setting up their media, running channels. We also have over 40,000 KOCs now in our pool, and we run specific KOC marketing programs that I lightly touched on before to help drive them initial sales. We have over 15,000 KOLs that we work with. So we have a lot of resources in kind of that media sphere, where we can help brands with the awareness, the growth, the sales part, and then also with localization, branding as well. So we have a very strong creative department that can help in terms of making sure that we get that right. And then finally, we have a lot of data. So we pull e-commerce data across 350 categories. We have social listening data, all using data mining technology, so we can stay up to date in terms of different trends of what's popular and what's selling well, and finding new KOLs that we can then invite to our pool. So I think that would be kind of the major part. So it's really the marketing and sales part of online.
Right. So a big question for me, and I'm asking this out of my own curiosity, because this is questions that I get, especially from potential new market entrants. So brands that are thinking about China, China is part of their global expansion strategy. What are you seeing right now in your industry, in your sector, regarding the current situation with the Shanghai lockdowns, political situation? What trends are you seeing? I mean, April and May was devastating for any brand that is already in China, right? I mean, I saw it from my clients' own financials. I mean, it was just a devastating 2 months. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think, being based in Shanghai was it was a horrific 2 months. But what we're seeing daily now is that it seems to have gone away. Touch wood, right? That's what we're hoping. I think that the severity and the problem with the lockdown is that for a lot of brands, even in lockdown, people are still buying FMCG. They're still buying different types of products. In some cases, they're spending more on home appliances and different elements. But with the Shanghai lockdown, there was just nothing you could buy, and so that I think has put quite a lot of fear in brands. The brands that were most affected had all their operations in Shanghai. And I think, there was one TP, a very similar setup to us. Thank God a lot of our stock, nearly all of it is actually Ningbo. So we were still able to trade. And I've seen a lot of brands now that are starting to move stock into different areas around the country because they're worried. If we look at Beijing right now, it's going into a kind of semi-lockdown state. They're worried that if they end up in just one of the cities, it might have an influence on global sales, because you've got on
That's
national
actually
sales.
super interesting, because I hadn't really thought about it. So brands are actually moving supply chain, not just in East Coast, which is what the trend has historically been, but they're actually moving it more inland and kind of spreading it out throughout.
Spreading it out. I think because that's
not a bad suggestion to make, actually. I mean,
yeah, because I think with the Chinese market, it's huge, right? So when globally we think of the lockdown in Shanghai, it does feel like the whole of China's locked down, but there are other cities, right? And so there are still consumers out there. But if all of your operations are here or in one city, that can make things a little bit difficult. I think that from a political outlook, I mean, there's kind of been this intentions with the US and China, and with Australia and China. If we look at politically, things are starting to look much better in some respects. Brands, I think, are at the moment focusing a lot on kind of their home markets and growing that element. But we've not seen any increases in, say, nationalism when it comes to, for example, buying Chinese products versus foreign products, which from our side, on our data, it was about a year and a half ago when that happened. There was about a 6-month period where sales were really hit for a lot of our brands that kind of had that very, we're a foreign brand here in the market. That seems to have kind of thawed out too. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in the market.
But do you not see, and again, this is what I'm hearing. I also posted an article, an interview that was done by one of the top JD guys, where he was basically saying people are more resistant, is that a word? Resistant to actually spending because the economy is down. They're not sure if they're going to lose their jobs. They're not. So whereas in 2020, I think everybody was kind of like, yeah, I'm going to buy online because I've got nothing better to do with myself. And it was sort of, there was, I don't know why, but it seems like there seemed to be more security of jobs being retained versus now. Are you seeing that as well?
There's, I think, from a kind of an economy view, there's been lots of layoffs at kind of top tech companies in China, and so it would appear that consumer sentiment should drop dramatically. If we look at, for example, sales for JD releases 618 results.
How was it?
It grew. I mean, it grew by, I think it was about 15%, 10 to 15%. Did it grow by 22% like last year? No. But I think that brings a lot to the point of it. It's still growing. There's still as much sales, if not 10% more than last year. Does it mean it's as easy to come in and grow as before? A lot of the problems, again, I think were actually last year from an e-commerce perspective. The cost within Tmall became higher. And so I think there was probably more of a damaging effect from that and kind of having to readjust that than there is right now, right? I mean, that being said, it really does depend on what happens in the next few months. But
So I'm curious on that
yeah.
point, because a lot of brands, and we've had this conversation as well, where we talk about this a lot, where a lot of brands say it's prohibitive for us to actually get into China because the startup costs on Tmall, on JD are just exorbitant, and we haven't even sold a single unit yet, right? How do you answer to a brand like that? Because you were talking about, TPs offer all of this different pricing, and some can go as low as 20,000 RMB, others 150,000. I mean, if I would get a proposal of 150,000, I haven't even sold one unit yet. I'm like, can't afford that, right? So how do you go about talking to brands that have this information at their fingertips saying, I've gotten these proposals and it just seems totally prohibitive for me to even do cross-border e-commerce?
Yeah, I think, if we go back 7, 8, 10 years ago, a lot of brands, China was kind of like a cash cow, right? It was a great opportunity to sell in product, and it sold relatively easy, and you'd grow year on year, and profitability was high. The reality is it's no longer like that. If you want to play in the Chinese market, there needs to come a cost with that. It's a relatively significant cost, and the market has to be taken seriously. It can't really be treated as it's another one of the 9 kind of countries in Asia that we're looking to enter this year anymore. It has to be treated as its own continent in a way, its own kind of market. And I think that's the first part. If the brand's willing to invest in the market, there's lots that you can have in terms of return and the growth, and it has the potential, and there is the pie there to be taken. The second part on that, though, would also be, it's really easy to spend $1 million in China and not get much from it. It's just too easy. So I think that, and when I mentioned today, the test and learn, all these different things and the different prices with TPs, you've really got to think about every dollar you're putting in. Is that going towards a goal, right? And that goal is essentially to grow the business, to have sales, and to
scale up,
to gain more customers, to scale up, right? And so if there are things where, we've worked with a brand before, I remember, that just kept going back to localization all the time, and we're recreating stuff, and spending lots of money and time, and that's great, but
not actually moving forward.
And not moving forward, exactly, right? So I think it's fine to make changes as you go along, but going back to plan A doesn't help, and so then it becomes very expensive. I think you've got to think at some point, the next $100, let's put it towards another thing that will help us in terms of achieving that aim.
You had this beautiful diagram about the market entry, right? And what would be the various steps. And, one of them was localization, then you move on to the e-commerce platforms, and then you move on to distributors, right? What is, and I'm putting you on the spot, but on average, what is the general timeline? And if you want to go back to that slide, Ryan, just go ahead and share your screen. But what is the general timeline? Because my spiel to a lot of people is, don't come to China unless you've got the financial resources, the human resources, i.e. you've got people who can actually do this for you. And third, the time. Because I think people make the assumption they'll enter today, and maybe John West wasn't the right example, because you said they made 1.4 million in 6 months or 5 months, but it does take time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. So, when you look at this market entry diagram, right, what in your opinion is an average timeline that people should be thinking about? Because I don't want people to have the expectation that they can set this up overnight, even if they've got the financial resources, and think that they're going to expand, they're going to do each of these steps within a month, right? It's just not gonna, it's not realistic.
I mean, it's better to have some of these things running around the same time, just because they complement each other. I'll give you an example with localization and IP. Localization, IP, market entry strategy, they're all kind of intertwined, right?
Yes.
So although IP would be the first thing that you check, because there's no point localizing, coming up with a brand name and all of this different stuff, and then you find out you can't register it, you can't use it, and so there's a part where you can group that into one area. That's probably a good 2 months of work there. Obviously with the IP, Kristina, you would know more than
Well, I
me
mean, the
about this,
registration for the IP doesn't take
yeah.
2 months, but I mean, coming up, I mean, just one project that Ryan and I worked on was actually a client that was looking to localize their name. And so I think you came up with a couple of Chinese name options for them, which was the fun. But then, you know, the IP registration took 9 months, right, of that brand name. And actually, one question that I had, and something I could be totally misinformed about, but I always had the assumption that if you're setting up a Tmall flagship store or a JD, whatever flagship store on any e-commerce platform, do you not have to show your IP license, your trademark license?
For domestic, yes. For domestic, yes. For cross-border, you need it in country of origin. But it's beneficial. It's beneficial to have it.
Okay.
It is beneficial to have it.
For cross-border e-commerce, it's not a requirement to have.
It's not 100% requirement. No.
Okay, I mean, it's a recommendation, but it's not 100% requirement. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, definitely recommended. We would have quite serious talks with brands when they hadn't registered, just to say, look, you will lose this, and then it's kind of that difficult discussion. And you know, as an agency, we want to have long and fruitful partnerships where the next stage is going into domestic e-commerce, and so that becomes blocked if
that makes it interesting for everybody, right?
It does, it does. And I think so. I mean, yeah, the first stage is, as you mentioned, 9 months probably. You know, that's got to be running in the background to some extent, where you're waiting quite a long time. So I think once it's filed and you get to a certain level, you can kind of comfortably move forward.
And this leads with a parallel question, which is, I know with cross-border e-commerce, you also don't have to do product registrations, but at some point you want to sell domestically, right? So, but obviously you don't want to do a product registration, which will cost additional money. It will actually take, you know, similar amount of time as the IP registration. At what point in this flow would you start? What would be the trigger to say, okay, now we've got to think about product registrations?
Probably a couple of months into selling on cross-border. Right? I mean,
so if you're seeing the results, then start doing it, right?
Yeah.
And do you normally give that trigger? Do you normally say to your clients, hey guys, we're doing well. The first 3 months have been successful. Think about it.
We do. I mean, you know, a lot of the brands that we work with, they, you know, some of them are big companies that have already made up their mind. They're coming into domestic, you know, whether they like it or not. For others, we will say, look, we think it's time to start. Most brands, if I look at it, they would probably wait 6 to 9 months. You know, after 3 months, we can get a good idea from the sales conversion, how well this brand can do. But usually they'll be like, okay, we'll wait a bit longer. It could be 6 to 8 months, and then product registrations will start to be put forward, right? If they're in personal care and nutritional health,
right?
And that's I would say that would be kind of that long. And I mean, usually we'd say for media channels, 2 to 3 months after cross-border has been set up. So you've kind of got, I think in total here, we're really looking at up until the point where you're looking at domestic, you've got 9 months, right, of work that's been going on. So it does take time. Yeah.
Right. Couple more questions. I mean, nothing is popping in, so I'm just going to keep having this conversation with you. I hope you don't mind. I hope the audience doesn't mind, the ones who are coming on live don't mind. So you didn't in the presentation talk about it. You talked about it in your company introduction though, and I want to touch on it. So one of the questions I had actually written down was, how many SKUs should you start with? You answered that question during the presentation, saying, you know, the more the merrier, basically. But for me, a lot of it will also depend on the data mining. And you talked about this as one of your services, but I would love for you to touch a little bit more on how vital it is to do data mining, because, you know, and also tied into that, you had one slide, which I was really surprised by. You only put 1% of the budget going into research. And I'm curious to know why that is.
Yeah. So I think, you know, the 1% the reason why it's kind of put in place, it's probably a little bit tough on research, is for two reasons. One is because it's an ongoing process of learning. And I think that's something that there's research investment built into all of them budgets in a way, but it's more of looking at from beginning to end. In the beginning, yes, you need to have a good strategy, but it doesn't need to take 6 months, right? It could be something that's in place in a couple of months.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important part. And then with, I think it is important to understand the market. The data mining helps because it'll tell you, are the flavors acceptable? Is the function acceptable? The key things, right? There are brands that, and it really looks at, I guess, are you likely to come to market or not? And I think if I could change that slide, we've worked with a lot of brands in the past where we'll do a lot of research and we'll kind of say, it's not really your market. They still come anyway. And then I really wish we could have gone back in time and we could have spent less time on that and put it more into the chance of growing the brand. Because to be honest, there are brands that do come to market based on advice that they should and do well. There's a number that we work with that I know had been told, product's too sweet, too colorful, doesn't really work, and now they're a top seller in the market. So that part I think is important. And then for brands that we know fit, we have a general good feeling, right? So I think they can pull out some key points that will help with MPD. Yeah, I think maybe I was a bit harsh on the 1%. I think it probably should be 3 or 4. But the point is to show and emphasize how much needs to go into Tmall.
Right.
I think that's the important element there.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I just think that you have to do a bit of, I always think it's difficult for people to make decisions on what SKUs to bring in, on pricing, because you mentioned pricing as a big point as well, without looking at your competitors. What are they doing? What flavors are they bringing in? What price point are they selling at? And like you said, it's a service that you offer where you can do this type of data mining on the various e-commerce platforms, right? The last one I want to finish up on, or actually 2 questions I want to finish up on. First of all is, let's say you open a Tmall store, it's a flagship store, and you start selling, right? And it becomes a machine. And you said that, within the first 6 to 9 months, you're doing these reports to look at what's going on, what's working, what's not working, and you're pivoting. But how do you ultimately then scale up? I mean, that's your objective. That's the client's objective. What is that? What do you have to do to actually bring this up to a scale level and maintain that? I mean, not that it plateaus at some point, which could be in 5 years, 6 years. How do you continue this drive up?
So there's two key parts to that. The first one is the purpose of the test and learning, getting things right in the beginning, is to make sure the brand doesn't spend too much on things that don't work, right? And so if we say for any given year, there's a set budget of X, 2 million RMB for the entire kind of view of the year, then if we spend 1 million on the wrong tool, it's not going to help with that growth. So it's how do we test and learn, and then to scale, put larger investments. So usually we'll actually increase investment in the following months into the tools, into the platforms that we're generating strong sales. That's kind of the way that works, and that will help to bring that kind of scale element. There's other things such as a KOC marketing program I mentioned, where the ROI is not great. For every RMB, we can probably get 2 RMB sales, but it's guaranteed new customers. What brands really need to do is, how do they get to that 10,000 customers? Because the real scale where a lot of money can be made in China is where you have people talking about the brand, recommended the brand. And so you need to bring up organic traffic as much as you can and repeat purchase so that it can naturally have a build. And what you're doing in marketing is really just, it's adding to that, right? It's adding that nice 10 to 20% in sales year on year.
But then it's probably also adding then additional SKUs over time, probably eliminating SKUs that don't really generate too much revenue. I mean, it's also pivoting in that way, right? And adding more things inside the portfolio.
I think the SKUs point is a really good point. I mean, it's, you start to learn what consumers like about your products, and you start to understand what consumers would really, really want, whether it's a flavor or a function.
I mean,
and that's where you can tap into that.
I mean, I actually have a client who's even got the attention, not now, but they've done a whole like 5-6 year plan, has even the intention of changing flavors into more like green tea, lychee type flavors. It's FMB brand, but also changing the packaging. Yeah. So, if you're doing cross-border e-commerce, you're selling the packaging from overseas. And it's part of what you've said a lot about in terms of localization. At some point, you might want to localize the packaging as well. To attract them. I mean, everybody has a different strategy, but with this client, this is one of their visions as well. So I guess just to finish off today, and again, if anybody's got questions, just put them into the chat box. So just to finish off from my side is prep for 11/11. I mean, 6/18 is done. Seems like the results were pretty good. My feeling is that a lot of people are focusing right now, since the Shanghai lockdowns, purely on the prep work for 11/11 to really kick that off, even more so than the 9th of September. So, what is this prep work? What can you do from now, end of June till November, particularly with the fact that isn't there now like 3 to 4 weeks of promotions that happens before the actual 11/11 date? Like you can still do all of that, right?
I think when we think about preparation, that explains why maybe, to be fair to 618, it wasn't as high as some people had anticipated, even though it was quite good, because we weren't able to do any preparation.
Yes.
A big part of what you do for 11/11 is a preparation. It's growing that awareness so that when you do the live streaming, as I mentioned, you've already got people ready to buy and you're on that shopping list. 618, we weren't able to do that. So now with 11/11, I mean, it sounds early in July, but the pre-sales for 11/11 starts, I think, middle of October 20th.
Right after the October holiday, right?
Right after the October holidays. And this year it could even be earlier. It gets earlier every year. So if we were to say it's mid to early October, you've really got July, August, and September to prepare.
To book your
so there's only 3 months. Get
the inventory on the ground.
Exactly. So it's inventory planning. It's building that awareness. So as I mentioned, with everything in the curve, as you're growing in, it's starting to build them foundations again, that awareness, working with KOLs, coming up with a creative campaign, because there's nothing really that creative you can do during 11/11 apart from say 50% off. It's more about how do you build that brand equity up to that point. So a lot of the preparations, KOLs, advertising campaigns. We even now offline sampling is becoming very popular, to get people to trial products and then giving them coupons and saying, in 11/11 you can come find us on Tmall. So there's quite a lot of work to do, but it'll start pretty much next week and the week after.
Right. Brands that are now, I have companies that are coming to me now and saying, okay, Shanghai lockdowns are over. We feel a little bit better, starting to think about China again. Is it too late for them to come into market right now? I mean, there's the September 9th, there's 11/11. I mean, should they, if they're setting up now, is it really for Chinese New Year?
Yeah, I mean, look, the first 11/11 is never one that will kind of do extremely well, but if you have 3 to 4 months, it's usually enough, right? So if, for example, brands are serious and they were to start now in the next couple of weeks, then 11/11 can be reached for, because you have that pre-warm period,
right?
And then you have that launch where you can, as I showed with John West, we're able to kind of take the store from that kind of level. But that being said, we started
but if they don't have a flagship store yet, they need to still set that up first, right?
Yes. Right. So it would, to some extent, 11/11 would be a nice kind of bumper sales season, but wouldn't be a means to an end. Right. It would be more, we bring up the kind of the height and sales in the store.
Could be the launch. It could be the launch of the brand.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And then 12/12, and then Chinese New Year.
It could be picking everything up. Yeah.
And then probably your really big focus would be 618, right? Because
Right.
as you come back
Right.
around, yeah,
Right. Right.
because then you'd have had nearly a full year.
Right. Amazing. Ryan, I'm going to leave it there because we've gone 15 minutes past. But I always have great conversations with you. And every year it seems to be a
Same.
totally different set of questions and information. So I really want to thank you for joining me today. And for those of you that have participated live, thank you also. We've got a whole set of other topics coming up in the next 4 weeks, all around e-commerce, trade, marketing. So if you're interested in that, sign up. Well, you've already signed up, but join next on every Wednesday. We will have the roundtable. So Ryan, fantastic. Lovely to see you again. I hope you're surviving in Shanghai.
Thanks for having me.
And I'll speak to everyone very soon. Take care and goodbye.
Cheers. Bye now.